The air in the council chamber was suffocating, despite its vastness. Captain Michael Iron Mike Carter sat stiffly in his chair, a silent storm brewing behind his sharp blue eyes. Across the polished black table, glowing with holographic projections of Earth's defenses, loomed the Zarklan delegation. Their leader, High Proctor Zalith, towered over the room, his translucent exosuit refracting light in unsettling ways. His thin, almost skeletal face contorted into what passed for amusement among his kind. "You call these weapons?" Zalith's voice was deep, reverberating in a way that made the chest vibrate. A clawed finger gestured toward the holograms displaying Earth's arsenal: aging ballistic missiles, rudimentary railguns, and the M1 Abrams tank. Zalith leaned closer, his three pupilless eyes fixed on Carter. Quaint, almost nostalgic, in a way. Carter clenched his jaw, his knuckles white against the edge of the table. Beside him, Sergeant Paul Ramirez tilted his head, muttering under his breath, "We should show them Quaint." The Zarklans had arrived on Earth 3 months prior, descending without ceremony or warning. Their fleet, vast, angular behemoths that blocked out the sun, had positioned itself in Earth's orbit like a noose. Their emissaries, with their unnerving calm and technology centuries ahead, offered humanity a single proposition: assimilation or extinction. Humanity had resisted at first, scrambling to make sense of the invaders' demands. Earth's leaders had argued for weeks, debating strategies, alliances, and the potential futility of resistance. Now, the final negotiation was being held in this sterile, subterranean room buried beneath the Rockies, where the air smelled faintly of ozone and desperation. Zalith leaned back, folding his spindly arms. "Let us speak plainly, as your time is limited. You will submit to the Zarklan Empire. Your people will serve in whatever capacity we deem fit. Resist, and we will cleanse your planet. Efficiently, thoroughly." His grin stretched wider, revealing rows of needle-like teeth. "The choice is yours." Carter shifted in his seat, his steel-toed boots scraping faintly against the floor. Across the table, Earth's Secretary of Defense opened his mouth to respond, but Carter cut him off. "Tell me something," Carter said, his voice even but razor-sharp. "If we're so beneath you, why the ultimatum? Why not just wipe us out and be done with it?" Zalith's amusement faltered, if only for a moment. He tilted his head, his mandibles twitching. "Mercy," he replied. "It is rare but not absent in our empire. We prefer to preserve resources where possible. Assimilation is far more efficient than annihilation." "Bullshit," Ramirez whispered just loud enough for Carter to hear. Carter's lips twitched in what might have been the shadow of a smile. He turned his gaze back to Zalith, unwavering. "We'll take the offer under advisement." Zalith's grin returned, but this time there was an edge to it. "Advisement? Of course. You have one planetary rotation to decide." He rose, his towering frame unfolding like some nightmarish insect, and gestured for his delegation to follow. The Zarklan envoys filed out of the chamber, their movements eerily fluid, leaving behind a suffocating silence. As soon as the heavy doors hissed shut, Carter turned to Ramirez and Private Jonathan Mills, the youngest member of his unit. "Thoughts?" Mills hesitated, his boyish face pale but determined. "Sir, they don't think we're a threat. That's their weakness." Carter nodded slowly. "True, but we're not a threat, yet." Ramirez snorted. "Yet, that's doing some heavy lifting, Mike. We're up against an empire that can probably melt us from orbit without breaking a sweat." "Then we don't let them," Carter said simply. He stood, pacing to the far side of the room where a holographic display still showed Earth's military assets. His fingers hovered over the image of the Abrams, its blocky silhouette almost laughably archaic compared to the sleek alien hovercraft that had obliterated 2 human colonies within hours. "We've got one thing they don't." "And what's that?" Ramirez asked, arms crossed. Carter turned to face him, his eyes burning with an intensity that made even Ramirez take a step back. "Desperation." They're comfortable, complacent. They think this is a game. It's not. Ramirez opened his mouth to argue, but closed it again when Mills spoke. What's the plan, sir? We fight, Carter said. Ramirez's laugh was short and bitter. With what? Harsh language? Maybe throw some old Abrams tanks at their shielded hovercraft? I hate to break it to you, Mike, but those things are antiques. Antiques don't break down, Carter countered. They're reliable, tough, and familiar. And they don't rely on fancy tech that can be disabled. You saw what happened to their shield generators when we hit them with EMP bursts. They flickered, briefly, but enough to give us an opening. We don't need to outgun them. We just need to outthink them. Ramirez frowned, his mind already turning over possibilities. Outthink them, huh? You're talking guerrilla tactics, unconventional warfare. Exactly, Carter said. He turned back to the hologram, his expression hardening. We're not beating them on their terms, so we make them fight on ours. Mills stepped closer, his voice steady despite the tension in the room. If we can figure out how to get through their shields, we've got a chance. Even if it's a small one. Ramirez sighed, running a hand through his short-cropped hair. A small chance. Great. I love those odds. Carter clapped him on the shoulder. You're still here, aren't you? Before Ramirez could respond, the chamber door opened and General Anthony Walker entered, his face set in grim determination. Captain Carter, your unit's being deployed to Europa. The Zarklins hit it an hour ago. Civilian casualties are already in the thousands. We're pulling out the survivors, but someone needs to buy us time. Carter straightened, his voice firm. We'll handle it, sir. Walker's eyes flicked to the hologram of the Abrams. You're taking those with you? Damn right, Carter replied. They might laugh now, but they won't when we're done. Walker nodded once, his jaw tight. Good luck, Captain. You'll need it. As the general left, Ramirez let out a low whistle. Europa, huh? Guess we're really doing this. Carter turned to his team, his voice calm but unyielding. They think we're nothing. Let's prove them wrong. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Mills stepped forward, his eyes alight with a mixture of fear and determination. When do we leave? Carter smiled faintly. Now. The team followed him out of the chamber, their footsteps echoing in the empty halls. Behind them, the holographic display flickered, the image of the Abrams tank standing resolute against the impossible odds. The rhythmic hum of machinery echoed to the underground facility, a sound both monotonous and oddly comforting. Captain Michael Iron Mike Carter stood at the edge of the testing range, his arms crossed tightly over his chest. The modified M1 Abrams loomed before him, its once familiar silhouette now bristling with experimental additions. Beside him, Sergeant Paul Ramirez was hunched over a tablet, his fingers flying across the screen as he reviewed the schematics. Explain it to me again, Carter said, his tone sharper than usual. In plain English, Ramirez sighed, straightening up. Fine. We've stripped out the main gun and replaced it with a prototype railgun. Uses electromagnetic pulses to launch a tungsten slug faster than anything we've ever built. It's got enough kinetic energy to punch through anything short of a mountain. Problem is, it eats power like a starving dog at a barbecue. Carter raised an eyebrow. And Ramirez continued. If we fire more than 3 shots in a row, it overheats and shuts down. Best case, you're out of commission for 10 minutes while it cools. Worst case, it melts itself down, and we're sitting ducks. Sounds like a feature, not a bug, Carter muttered, his sarcasm laced with frustration. Hey, I'm not the genius who designed it, Ramirez said, jerking his thumb toward the far end of the room. Dr. Alan Cooper, a wiry man in his 50s with perpetually unkempt hair, was pacing back and forth, muttering to himself as if the world outside didn't exist. He stopped abruptly, turning toward the tank with the wide-eyed intensity of a mad scientist. The overheating problem is a minor inconvenience, he declared, his voice echoing. What matters is that it works. Minor inconvenience. Ramirez shot back. Tell that to the poor bastards inside the tank when it turns into an oven. Cooper waved dismissively. Details. We'll solve it in time. What's important is that the railgun can pierce Zarklin's shields. Do you understand what that means? They think they're invincible, but this, he gestured dramatically toward the tank. This levels the playing field. Carter exhaled slowly, his patience wearing thin. Doctor, we don't have time. The Zarklins aren't going to wait for you to iron out the kinks. We need something that works now. Cooper blinked, as if the reality of their situation had only just occurred to him. Then I suppose we'll just have to hope you're very, very good at aiming. A faint chuckle came from Private Jonathan Mills, who had been standing quietly nearby, taking in every detail. Guess that puts the pressure on me, huh? Carter turned to him, his expression softening slightly. You'll do fine, Mills. You've got the best reflexes in the unit, and you're a damn good shot. Just remember, this isn't training anymore. Mills nodded, his youthful face set with determination. Understood, sir. The sound of boots on concrete announced the arrival of Lieutenant Evan Boss Daniels, who carried a clipboard and a scowl. Captain, logistics are in place. We've got 2 Abrams tanks retrofitted and ready for deployment. The rest of the unit's gearing up. He glanced at the tank, his scowl deepening. Still don't know how I feel about putting our faith in experimental tech, but orders are orders. They'll hold, Carter said firmly, though his own doubts lingered. Daniels nodded curtly and handed Carter the clipboard. We've also outfitted EMP mines and jammer drones, as you requested. Won't stop the Zarklins, but it'll slow them down. Carter flipped through the details before handing the clipboard back. Good work. Make sure the men know what's at stake. Daniels hesitated, his usual stoic demeanor giving way to a flicker of uncertainty. They know, Captain. But if I'm being honest, morale's low. The men don't think we can win this. Good, Carter replied, his voice cold. Fear keeps you sharp. Complacency gets you killed. Daniels didn't argue, but the weight of his silence lingered as he turned and walked away. As the crew returned to their tasks, Carter stepped closer to the tank, running a gloved hand over its reinforced armor. It felt alien now, with its sleek new lines and glowing conduits. And yet, beneath the modifications, it was still the same machine he had spent half his life commanding. It was dependable, familiar, a relic of a time when battles were fought with grit and steel, not plasma and politics. Ramirez joined him, leaning casually against the tank. You really think this is going to work? I don't think we have a choice, Carter replied. Ramirez smirked. That's not exactly a confidence boost. Carter turned to him, his expression unreadable. Ramirez, we've got 2 days to get this thing ready. If we fail, there won't be a second chance. So, no, I don't think it's going to work. I know it has to. The weight of his words settled over them like a shroud. Ramirez said nothing, but his smirk faded. The quiet was broken by a sudden, ear-splitting roar as the railgun fired, sending a tungsten slug hurtling down the range. The tank shuddered, its chassis groaning under the strain, but the target at the far end, a mock-up of a Zarklin hovercraft, exploded into a shower of sparks and debris. Ha! Cooper shouted, pumping his fists in the air. Did you see that? Beautiful. Magnificent. Ramirez whistled low. Well, I'll be damned. Carter's eyes remained fixed on the smoking wreckage. That's one shot, he said quietly. We'll need a hell of a lot more than that. As if on cue, the railgun emitted a high-pitched whine, followed by a plume of steam from its cooling vents. Cooper's triumphant grin faltered. Ah, yes, that. Minor inconvenience, remember? Carter turned to face him, his voice cold and unyielding. Fix it. Cooper bristled but nodded, muttering to himself as he hurried back to his workstation. Mills stepped forward, his expression a mix of awe and trepidation. Sir, If that thing can really punch through their shields. It can, Carter interrupted. But it won't matter if we can't keep it running. The young soldier nodded, his resolve hardening. Then we'll make it work. Whatever it takes. Carter placed a hand on Mills's shoulder, giving it a reassuring squeeze. That's the attitude we need. As the team dispersed to their tasks, Carter stood alone beside the tank, his mind racing. He knew the odds were stacked against them, but he also knew this was their only chance. The Zarklans thought humanity was weak, broken, incapable of standing against them. They were wrong. Carter allowed himself a faint smile as he turned away from the tank, his voice low but steady. Let's show them what desperation really looks like. The first burst of fire lit up Europa's frozen surface like a flare, bathing the desolate ice fields in an eerie, brief glow. Captain Michael Carter crouched behind a jagged outcropping, his breath clouding the visor of his helmet. Overhead, the Zarklan hovercraft swooped low, their sleek frames humming with energy. Every pass sent vibrations through the ground, a constant reminder of the precarious situation they faced. Through the haze of frost and smoke, Carter's voice came steady over the comms. Ramirez, status on the Abrams? Still operational, Ramirez replied, his tone clipped. Cooling systems holding up, barely. But it's not exactly subtle. They know where we are. Good, Carter said. Let them come. The Abrams stood at the base of a shallow ravine, its matte black surface streaked with frost. Modified to operate in Europa's brutal environment, the tank looked more like a predator lying in wait than an antiquated relic. Mills was in the gunner's seat, his hands gripping the controls with white-knuckled determination. Target at 3 o'clock, Mills said, his voice tight. Range, 600 meters. Shields active. Load it, Carter ordered. Ramirez, seated beside Mills, adjusted the power settings on the railgun. The faint whine of capacitors charging filled the cabin. Slugs loaded, ready to fire on your command. The Zarklan hovercraft, oblivious to the trap, hovered closer. Its shield shimmered faintly in the dim light, a dome of energy that had rendered conventional human weapons useless. The craft's underside bristled with alien weaponry, each glowing barrel capable of leveling a city block. Carter watched from his vantage point, counting the seconds. His heart pounded, but his voice remained calm. Wait for it. Let them get in range. The hovercraft drifted lower, scanning the area with beams of pale blue light. A second passed, then another. Now, Carter said. The railgun fired with a deafening crack, the sound splitting the frigid air. A brilliant streak of light tore through the shield, shattering it like glass. The tungsten slug slammed into the hovercraft's core, detonating in a fiery explosion that sent fragments of alien metal raining down. Inside the tank, Mills let out a shaky breath. Direct hit? Confirmed, Carter said, watching the wreckage smolder in the distance. Good shooting. The celebration was short-lived. A high-pitched screech filled the air as 3 more hovercraft descended, their shields glowing like malevolent halos. Multiple bogies inbound, Ramirez said, his hands flying over the controls. Cooling systems still recovering. We've got 1 shot, maybe 2, before we're a sitting duck. Carter cursed under his breath. Deploy the jammers. Slow them down. Small drones launched from concealed compartments on the Abrams, scattering into the air like a swarm of angry hornets. The drones emitted bursts of electromagnetic interference, causing the hovercraft's shields to flicker erratically. Jammers active, Mills reported, but they won't hold for long. Then we make it count, Carter said. The hovercraft retaliated, their plasma cannons lighting up the ravine with searing beams of energy. The Abrams shuddered as debris rained down, the ground buckling under the onslaught. Mills, pick your target, Carter barked. Ramirez, keep that railgun from melting down. The young gunner zeroed in on the closest hovercraft, his fingers steady despite the chaos. Locked on, firing, the railgun roared again and another shield shattered. The tungsten slug ripped through the hovercraft, sending it spiraling into the ground. The explosion shook the ravine, but there was no time to celebrate. "Cooling systems at critical," Ramirez shouted. "I need at least 30 seconds, or this thing's toast." "We don't have 30 seconds," Carter snapped. The remaining hovercraft closed in, their weapons targeting the Abrams. Carter's mind raced, weighing their dwindling options. "Ramirez, deploy the EMP mines," he ordered. "Mills, hold your fire until I give the signal." The mines, buried beneath the ice, activated with a low hum. As the hovercraft moved over them, a sudden surge of electromagnetic energy erupted, disabling their shields and disrupting their targeting systems. "They're exposed," Ramirez said. "But we're out of time. Cooling systems shutting down." Carter didn't hesitate. "Mills, fire the last shot." The young gunner didn't need to be told twice. The railgun fired, its final round obliterating one of the exposed hovercraft in a blinding flash. The tank groaned under the strain, vents hissing as steam poured out. The remaining hovercraft, damaged but not destroyed, retaliated with a barrage of plasma fire. The Abrams took a direct hit, the impact throwing Carter to the ground. "Captain," Mills shouted over the comms. "I'm fine," Carter said, his voice strained. He staggered to his feet, scanning the battlefield. The Abrams was still standing, though its armor was scorched and smoking. The final hovercraft hovered menacingly, its weapons charging for a killing blow. Carter's jaw tightened. "Ramirez, status?" "Railguns offline," Ramirez said, his voice grim. "We've got nothing left." Carter's mind raced, desperation clawing at him. He looked at the wreckage of the first hovercraft, an idea forming. "Mills, can you get us to that wreckage?" Yeah, but why?" "Just do it," Carter ordered. The Abrams roared to life, its treads grinding against the ice as it surged forward. Plasma fire rained down around them, but the tank pressed on, plowing through debris and smoke. As they reached the wreckage, Carter jumped onto the alien craft, tearing open a damaged panel. His gloved hands worked quickly, pulling out a glowing power core. "What the hell are you doing?" Ramirez demanded. "Improvising," Carter said. He climbed back onto the Abrams, securing the core to the railgun's power conduit. "That's insane," Ramirez protested. "Maybe," Carter replied, "but it's all we've got." The power core hummed ominously as it fed into the railgun, the weapon sparking to life. Carter climbed back inside, his face grim. "Mills, one more shot." "Make it count." The young gunner didn't question the order. The railgun charged, its glow brighter than before. The final hovercraft hovered closer, its weapons primed. "Fire," Carter said. The railgun fired with a deafening crack, the modified power core unleashing a blast that tore through the hovercraft like a hot knife through butter. The explosion lit up the ravine, the shockwave knocking the Abrams back. When the dust settled, there was silence. The battlefield was littered with wreckage, the acrid smell of burnt metal filling the air. Inside the Abrams, Ramirez let out a shaky laugh. "We're still alive." "Barely," Carter said, slumping back in his seat. Mills turned to face him, his face pale but triumphant. "Did we win?" Carter allowed himself a faint smile. "For now." The comms crackled with static as reinforcements arrived, their voices filled with relief and disbelief. Carter looked out at the ruins of the hovercraft, his expression hardening. "This was just the beginning," he said quietly. "They'll come back. Stronger, smarter. Then we'll be ready," Ramirez said. Carter nodded, the weight of their survival pressing heavily on his shoulders. They had won the battle, but the war was far from over. The chamber was impossibly vast, its sheer scale designed to intimidate. The central platform hovered in a column of light, surrounded by tiered rows of alien delegates whose forms ranged from shimmering gelatinous masses to angular, insectoid exoskeletons. Overhead, holographic projections displayed the aftermath of the skirmish on Europa, frozen at the moment the last Zarklan hovercraft had been obliterated. Captain Michael Carter stood rigid, his uniform still marked with soot and grime from the battle. Flanking him were Sergeant Ramirez, his stoic expression betrayed only by the tension in his jaw, and Lieutenant Daniels, every muscle in his body wound tight. Behind them, Private Mills stood at attention, his face pale but resolute. Before them, seated at the highest tier, was the Council, a collection of the galaxy's most powerful species, their representatives cloaked in shimmering robes of office. At the center sat Overseer Nakal, a towering figure of opalescent scales and piercing, multifaceted eyes. The Council recognizes a delegation from Earth, Nakal said, his voice resonating as if amplified by the very air itself. Captain Carter, you stand before us accused of breaching the Accord of Submission. Do you deny it? Carter's gaze swept the room, his eyes meeting those of the gathered delegates. He could feel their disdain, their disbelief that such a primitive species would dare to resist. But beneath their contempt, he detected something else, uncertainty. I do not deny it, Carter said, his voice calm and clear. Earth was given an ultimatum: submit or face annihilation. We chose a third option, resistance. Murmurs rippled through the chamber. The alien voice is a cacophony of clicks, hums, and growls. Resistance, Nakal repeated, the word dripping with disdain. A futile endeavor. Your species is outmatched in every conceivable way. Your technology is primitive, your numbers insignificant. The Zarklin's defeat on Europa was a fluke, an aberration. It changes nothing. With respect, Carter said, stepping forward, you're wrong. The chamber fell silent, the weight of his defiance hanging in the air. Humanity may lack your advanced technology, Carter continued, his voice steady. We may be outnumbered, outgunned, and outmaneuvered, but we have something you don't understand, something you can't quantify or replicate. Nakal's multifaceted eyes narrowed. And what is that? Ingenuity, Carter said. Adaptability. The ability to take what little we have and turn it into something more. On Europa, we used an outdated weapon, a relic by your standards, and we turned it into a tool that could pierce the invincible. You underestimated us because you thought we were predictable, that we'd cower in the face of superior force. But humanity doesn't cower. We fight. The murmurs resumed, louder this time, as the delegates debated among themselves. Carter could see the seeds of doubt spreading, the cracks forming in their facade of superiority. Nakal raised a clawed hand, silencing the chamber. Your defiance is admirable, if misguided, but it is also dangerous. The Accord exists to maintain order, to prevent chaos. Your actions threaten that balance. Balance, Carter echoed, his voice rising. You call it balance when entire civilizations are subjugated, their cultures erased, their people enslaved? Humanity didn't ask for this war. You forced it upon us. And now that we've shown we won't go quietly, you call us a threat to your precious order. Careful, Captain, Nakal warned, his tone icy. Carter ignored the warning, his frustration boiling over. You claim to be superior, to hold the moral high ground, but you're just bullies with better toys. And like all bullies, you're afraid of what happens when someone punches back. The chamber erupted into chaos, the delegates shouting over one another in a cacophony of alien languages. Nakal's claws curled into fists, his composure slipping. Ramirez leaned closer to Carter, his voice a low murmur. You sure about this, Mike? You're poking the bear. Not a bear, Carter replied under his breath. A house of cards. Nakal rose from his seat, his towering form casting a long shadow over the platform. Enough, he bellowed, his voice shaking the chamber. You speak of defiance, of resistance. But resistance is futile. Humanity will fall, just as countless others have before you. Then why haven't you crushed us already? Carter shot back, his tone sharp. If we're so insignificant, why waste your time with ultimatums and theatrics? Why not wipe us out and be done with it? Nakal hesitated, the question hanging in the air like a challenge. Carter seized a moment, pressing his advantage. "Because you're afraid," he said, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "You're afraid that if humanity stands, others will follow. That your empire isn't as invincible as you want us to believe. Europa wasn't just a battle. It was a message. And we both know the galaxy is listening." The silence that followed was deafening. Even the murmurs of the delegates ceased as all eyes turned to Nakal. The overseer's gaze burned with barely contained fury, but he didn't respond. Instead, he turned to the gathered council, his voice cold and measured. "The time for debate is over. Humanity has chosen its path. Let the galaxy bear witness to the consequences of defiance." He raised a clawed hand, and the holographic displays shifted, showing the mobilization of Zarklan fleets across the stars. Carter stood firm, his expression unwavering. "You can send your fleets. You can rain fire on our cities and crush our defenses. But you'll never break our spirit. Humanity will fight, and we'll keep fighting until the very end. And when the dust settles, when the smoke clears, the galaxy will remember us, not as victims, but as the ones who dared to stand." Nakal's eyes glinted with malice. "Then your end will serve as an example to all." Carter turned to his men, his voice calm despite the storm brewing around them. "We've got work to do." As the council chamber descended into chaos, the human delegation walked away, their heads held high. The galaxy's mightiest powers had delivered their ultimatum, but humanity had given its answer, and the fight was only beginning.